Today my guest is Sharron Dreyer. She and her husband Stan came here in 2011, and she lives in Forest View. She lost Stan a couple of years ago. And thank you very much, Sharron, for being my guest today.
My pleasure.
I'd like first for you to tell me about your current family. You have a couple of children. What are they doing?
I have two children, Beth and Stephen. Beth is married to an Army officer, and they live in Arnold, Maryland, where Don is stationed at Fort Meade.
Oh.
And they have two granddogs. Beth is an on-air personality at HSN, so once a month I can watch Beth on HSN demonstrate some crafting project that I and thousands of others can't live without.
Oh, okay.
My son Steve and his two boys live in Gulf Breeze, Florida. Steve is a graphic designer.
Oh.
Benjamin just graduated from high school, and Christopher is starting high school. So I miss having them closer, but all is well.
You do get to see them occasionally.
I do, yes. Last summer, Stephen and the boys and I took a week-long RV tour in Colorado.
Oh.
And we were planning a whole family cruise to Alaska this summer, but
that didn't pan out.
COVID got in the way of that, correct.
Well, what about your folks and your siblings? Where did you grow up?
I was born and raised, grew up in Denver, Colorado. I was an only child until I was 10, and then I had a surprise little brother. And we were great friends until he was about 4, and then he was a pain in the tush until we both grew up a little bit. And then, unfortunately, John died at age 50 of colon cancer. So his wife and 3 children are still in Denver.
That's the way with my brother. I was 10 years older than he, and I left home at 16, he was 6, and he was 6 years old for a long time.
Right, yeah, yes.
All right, well, do you have any interesting stories about elementary school or high school, did you?
I went to a very integrated elementary school, so I had friends of all colors and creeds, and I just thought that's the way life was.
Did you live in downtown Denver? Or
no,
suburbs?
Right on the edge, but not really in the suburbs.
Yeah.
But it just, the way the school district was, I think as it turned out now as an adult, I lived in what was the white part up here, but the Hispanics lived here and the blacks lived there, and we all met at elementary school. So it was a wonderful experience.
Good.
And Denver schools, some were fairly integrated through high school. I went off to the University of Colorado and got a bachelor's degree in nursing. And then I moved to Seattle and worked at Children's Hospital there. And then I came back to Denver and was a school nurse for 3 years.
My first assignment was in Seattle, in the Army.
I liked Seattle. The 2 roommates I went with left to go do other things, and I wasn't quite ready to stay in Seattle all by myself, so I went back to Denver for 3 years. And while I was in college, my family life sort of fell apart, and I worked at Woolworths, and the Woolworth ladies held my back to be sure that I got through college. And so after working for 4 years, I thought I needed to pay the Woolworth ladies back, but there was no paying them back, and it was kind of before pay things forward.
Yeah.
But because of them, I volunteered for a year with the Presbyterian Mission Board and said I would go anywhere that I could be used with only English. I didn't speak any foreign language.
Okay.
Somehow, Ethiopia won.
Do they speak only English in Ethiopia?
No, they don't. They don't. But apparently there was enough need to have a nurse there that they figured we could muddle through.
Okay.
As it turned out, there was a young woman, a young Anuak woman there, who had learned English in the Sudan, and because of a heart condition, she came up to the mission in Poquo for medical care. But she spoke wonderful English, so she kind of became my translator.
So this is Poquo, Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, right. It's in the thumb of Ethiopia near what's now South Sudan.
Okay, so it probably wasn't all that easy to get there, was it?
No, not exactly. I really didn't know what I was volunteering for, let's be honest. A friend drove me to New York. Then I got on a Greek ocean liner and went from New York to Athens by ship. I flew from Athens to Addis on a big 747 or whatever, a big plane. Then in Addis, I got on a little plane, flew to Gambela, and when I got to Gambela, they were waiting for me with a motorboat, and we motorboated 30 miles down the Baro River to the mission station, which had been there for about 5 years. It was originally to be 15 missionaries for 15 years to work with this Anahuac tribe to improve their health. We had an agriculturalist there who was improving.
And this was the Presbyterian church, right?
Yeah, it was a Presbyterian mission, so it was funded by the Presbyterian church.
Yeah.
The compound consisted of a 10-bed hospital, which basically was an oblong building with a tin roof, a clinic where we saw sometimes 200 patients a day,
Oh boy.
a chapel, and a big agricultural barn where the agricultural Ron could improve animal husbandry of the cows, and he did a lot of teaching for how to raise new crops like sweet potatoes. And
So the mission was wider than just nursing.
right, the mission was medical, agricultural, and spiritual. But the Anahuac language was not even a written language, so getting the Bible translated into Anahuac literally took 40 years.
Yeah.
But my focus obviously was medical.
Sure.
So
You had a doctor to work with that.
part of the time we had a doctor, sometimes we had 2 doctors. For a while there was another nurse, then it was furlough time, so people were coming and going.
So basically you handled 200 patients on some day?
Sometimes we did.
Yeah.
And payment for a visit was a can of corn, like a soup can full of corn. That's what people brought to pay. And if they couldn't pay, they didn't pay. But, you know, in the School of Nursing, you get to the tropical disease section and they say, well, here's smallpox, tetanus, typhoid, yellow fever, whatever, but you don't need to know about those things because you'll never see them. Suddenly, there I was seeing them. Smallpox were rampant, so one of the things that we did would be go into remote villages and vaccinate people against smallpox.
Isn't smallpox pretty much eradicated?
It is now.
Now?
It is now.
Yeah.
It was
not then, though. Huh?
It was not there then.
Yeah.
One of my favorite patients was a 10-year-old who had both smallpox and tetanus. So here was this sweet little thing covered with smallpox and totally rigid because of the tetanus.
Oh.
But she survived, and it occurred to me that in the United States, if we had somebody like that, we'd take them down to rehab to a hot tub and do physical therapy. So some of the big village boys made a stretcher and we carried her down to the river and did physical therapy in the river.
I think of tetanus more of a penetrating wound that causes.
That's where the organism causes it, but the result is that your body is stiff.
But that was causing, that was the primary cause?
That was what was causing her to be
okay,
stiff.
A penetrating wound.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And, you know, penetrating wound could have been, I mean, they didn't wear shoes, so she could have probably stepped on something,
yeah.
right? Anyway, it was the Anahuac people, which is the little tribe that we served, were wonderful, kind, caring, almost ebony-colored people. They were beautiful people and wonderful people.
Well, most of the Ethiopian people are.
Yes, but this was a more Nilotic tribe than the wonderful Ethiopian folks that work here.
Yeah.
And the folks here, when I talk to them, they say, "Oh, you worked with the dark people." So, yes, I did work with the very dark people.
Yeah. So
but,
you must be in favor of the Ethiopian workers here, huh?
Well, yes, I can recognize just from the tone of their saying hello, or their names.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I have some nice Ethiopian friends here at Green Spring. And it's always so touching when they find out that I know about Ethiopia. It's just the fact that I went there and know about their country that kind of opens up,
I'm sure
communication.
it does,
Right.
All right. Well, you came back from Ethiopia, and
I came back from Ethiopia. I had met Stan
after only 1 year.
After only 1 year, yeah. But it was a year without pay. It was a year as a volunteer.
Yeah.
I had saved enough money to get myself over there and back, but when I told my church that I was going to do that, they said, we'll pay your way over there and back.
Oh.
And I had resigned. I had tried to resign from the Denver Public Schools. They wouldn't let me resign. They gave me a leave of absence, so I had a job to come back to if I wanted to.
Good.
But I had met Stan just before I left, and so Stan was living in Chicago. So I came back to Chicago, and Stan and I married shortly after that. And we lived in Chicago for 3 years, where I did public health work. And then we moved to Northern Virginia because Stan moved his office here to Northern Virginia.
What was he doing?
Stan was president of the Cooperative League, which was a trade association of co-ops.
Oh. All right. Well, you got involved in hospice. That was after your kids were in school, I presume.
Right. So after we moved here, I was a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, I guess, during which time I did some volunteer work with an organization called Haven, which provided emotional support to people who were facing life-threatening situations. And one afternoon, the new executive director of a new organization called Hospice of Northern Virginia came to speak to the Haven volunteers.
And this was 1979.
Correct.
Yeah.
And, hospice was just a concept. It was popular in England. It was a place where people who were terminally ill could go to receive care that was more focused on the person rather than a medical cure or a medical environment. And a group basically in Arlington thought that it was a worthwhile idea and formed a board and incorporated, and so formed the organization that was then known as Hospice of Northern Virginia. So the idea of hospice is that
and they hired you now to develop the program.
They hired Dorothy Moga to do the kind of administrative piece, but then they needed a clinical person to kind of pull together the pieces to make hospice from a vision into a reality, to actually provide care to people who were terminally ill, who did not want to die in a hospital. So that meant medical, nursing, chaplain, social work, and volunteers to basically do whatever the person needed to make their last few days, weeks, months as meaningful as possible. So I spent pretty much my first year talking to insurance companies about this new idea of hospice, which was basically home care, to get reimbursement for nursing visits or doctor visits or medications. Worked with churches who would be willing to pay for services that insurance wouldn't pay for to begin with. We had office space in a empty second floor of Church of the Covenant in Arlington. So the first year was really writing policies and procedures and putting things in place that would make this concept of hospice become real. We developed a contract with the Visiting Nurse Association to provide nursing care until we could be licensed as a separate entity.
So you basically put together the hospice program for Northern Virginia.
Correct.
And you did it
not by myself.
No,
yes.
but you.
But that was my job to.
7 years you spent doing that.
Yeah, we had it pretty well put together after about the first year and a half, and during that time, I think the next person that was hired probably was a volunteer coordinator, because we used a lot of volunteers to do all sorts of wonderful things. We had a part-time social worker who could help families access services or do some counseling. We worked with churches to, many times people who are dying have some need to get their spiritual self together, and so we worked with local clergy who were willing to make home visits and go see people.
Do you have an estimate of the number of the people that you annually?
Then we thought we were doing great when we served like maybe 25 or 30 to begin with.
For the year?
Maybe not. I guess I don't remember how many we actually served the first year, but it was small.
Yeah.
Now I think they see up to 2,000 patients a day.
Oh boy.
But they have like 9 offices. It's now, Hospice of Northern Virginia is now Capital Caring, and it serves Maryland, DC, and Virginia. Has 8 or 10 offices to provide easy access.
Yeah.
Care is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so if you have a crisis in the middle of the night, you can always call somebody.
Well, you can look back and say, I contributed. I really did something.
Yes, I feel wonderful about that. Some days I'll say it's the best job I ever had, but I've had wonderful jobs that have enabled me to utilize the skills that I have.
Well, then you got your master's degree.
Yes, after 7 years, I realized that there's a difference between getting an organization started and ongoing operations, and I didn't know or care too much about things like budgets. You don't learn that in nursing school. And my children were in high school, so we decided if I was going to get a master's, I should get my degree out of the way before the kids came along. So I went to George Mason and got a degree in new program development and public administration with a certificate in gerontology. And when I finished that program, I was hired by Fairfax County Department of Housing that was just beginning to have senior housing for low and moderate income seniors, rental apartment complexes, and services for adults with special needs. So that was my job for the next 16 years.
Oh.
That was a little different shift from people who were dying to people who were actively enjoying their retirement.
But when you saw these people actively enjoying their retirement, maybe you decided to enjoy retirement too.
That's right. That's right. Yes. So that's what I've been doing since Stan and I moved to Green Spring.
How did you pick out Green Spring?
Well, for many reasons. Green Spring had a wonderful, I mean, even though I was dealing in my job with rental housing, I was aware of other senior housing options like Green Spring and Goodwin House and others. Stan and I lived just a mile from here. And so when
where did you live?
We lived on Robin Road.
Robin. Yeah, I lived up on Viola Street, just off Rolling, so it's about a mile or 2 miles.
Right. Robin Road is only a block and a half long. It's behind Garfield School.
Yeah, sure.
So
all the birds are over there. Oriole.
all the Oriole, yes,
yeah.
correct, right there. So once Stan and I decided that we were not going to follow our children, that we had connections here in Springfield. We were very involved in our church. So Green Spring was the logical place. It was a good decision.
Yeah, so you're just right down the road.
That's right. Yeah, right.
Yeah. A little further than Larry Ayers, but not much.
Right, correct. Yeah, he was just across the street.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, yeah.
All right, well, has Green Spring met your expectation?
Absolutely,
yeah.
I was not as ready. Stan was 10 years older than I, so he was 80. I was 70. I wasn't quite ready, but I did not come here yelling, kicking, and screaming, and it was a wonderful decision for us.
Yeah, we have a lot of 70-year-olds that have come here. Well, I say a lot, but and most of them have really enjoyed their life here.
Yes, I mean it was, as again I say, Stan was more tired of the big house and the yard and all that kind of stuff than I was, but you know, I lucked out. We live on a wonderful floor with great neighbors. We used to do our elevator gatherings where we'd have a party at the elevator once a month, and so it's been wonderful. And I was introduced to pottery, and now I'm hooked. So
you had never done pottery before?
I'd never done pottery before, so it's been great, and I know that both Stan's quality of life, his last several years, and mine subsequent to that couldn't have been better, and so much better than if we'd been home alone in our big house.
Yeah, I have the feeling that we probably extend our lives a few years by living here.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think that
it's a good life.
It's a good life. I mean, even here during COVID, you know, we haven't had to worry about going to the grocery store or those kinds of things. So it's a good place. Yep. Yeah, I recommend it.
Well, thank you very much for coming on today.
My pleasure.